The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Providence Municipal Court, spilling soft gold across the worn wooden benches. It was the kind of light that made dust look like glitter and turned ordinary spaces into quiet sanctuaries. But today, that soft glow felt like an ironic joke, because there was nothing serene about the crowd buzzing in Courtroom 3. Dozens had come out of pure curiosity, others came because they were angry, and a few came simply because Providence was a small city and word traveled fast, especially when scandal was involved, and especially when the name involved money, privilege, and a camera that caught everything. On the dais, Judge Frank Caprio adjusted his glasses and glanced at the growing audience. He wasn't rattled. His courtroom had seen tears, tempers, laughter, and every shade of human foolishness. But today's case carried a different temperature in the room, a heat that simmered beneath whispered gossip and folded arms. At the far end of the courtroom door, a pair of glossy black heels clicked sharply against the tile. The noise echoed, crisp as gunshots, and all conversation stopped. Veronica Langford, the woman at the center of the firestorm, stepped through the doorway. She moved with the kind of elegance people grew up watching in perfume commercials, slow, controlled, confident. Her tailored cream blazer hugged her frame, her silk blouse shimmered faintly, and her hair looked freshly blown out, curled to perfection. She held a designer clutch in one hand and an expression of cool indifference on her face. Not remorse, not caution, just entitlement in its purest, polished form. Beside her walked her attorney, a thin man with a perpetual frown, dragging a briefcase big enough to carry a small child. Behind them followed two men in understated security suits, not official guards, but the private kind that wealthy families hired to feel important. Cameras flashed from the back of the room. Reporters shifted forward. Phones lifted discreetly. Veronica didn't flinch. She tilted her chin upward like she was entering a gala instead of a courtroom. Judge Caprio sighed quietly. Another one. He struck the gavel once. Courtroom will come to order. Veronica settled into the defendant's chair with the grace of someone sitting front row at a Fashion Week show. Her attorney whispered urgently in her ear. She ignored him and scanned the room instead, smirking when she noticed a few people staring too long. At the opposite side of the courtroom, a man sat stiffly in his wheelchair, hands folded in his lap, shoulders tense with a quiet dignity that refused to crumble. His name was Henry Dalton, a retired firefighter, a man who had lost both mobility and vision in the line of duty. And yet, despite everything taken from him, he sat there without bitterness. His face carried exhaustion, yes, but also strength. The two couldn't have been more different. Veronica, who had never worked a day she didn't choose, and Henry, who had served until his body broke beneath the weight of his duty. Judge Caprio turned to the defense table. "Miss Langford, please step forward." Veronica rose, heels echoing like punctuation marks against the tension. She stopped before the bench and crossed one ankle behind the other, a stance that looked rehearsed and borderline defiant. Judge Caprio's voice remained steady. "You are charged with assault, property damage, and disorderly conduct in connection with the incident outside the Providence Community Center. Do you understand these charges?" Veronica lifted one shoulder delicately. "I understand what you're accusing me of, Your Honor." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Her attorney shot her a sharp look, but she simply folded her hands unbothered. Judge Caprio did not react. He opened a file, flipped through several pages, then nodded to the bailiff. "Please play the submitted video evidence." The lights dimmed slightly as the screen behind the judge flickered to life. Everyone leaned forward except Veronica, who kept her gaze steady, chin lifted. The footage began, grainy but clear. A sidewalk, late afternoon sunlight. A small crowd gathered outside the community center, and then Veronica entered the frame, her posture stiff, her face twisted with irritation. Henry Dalton was near the curb, using his cane to navigate toward the entrance. His service dog, a gentle golden retriever, sat patiently beside him. The audio crackled, and then her voice came through. "Watch where you're going." Henry paused. "Ma'am, I apologize if—" "You're blocking the way," she snapped, stepping toward him. The courtroom watched as Veronica snatched his white cane, the one tool that kept him from stumbling through a sightless world, and threw it onto the pavement. Henry flinched. Gasps filled the courtroom. Veronica, on the video, then slapped the brim of his hat, knocking it off his head and onto the street. Someone else in the video yelled for her to stop, but she didn't. Judge Caprio leaned back, his face unreadable. The video ended. Lights brightened. Silence clung to the room like humidity after a storm. Henry sat still, jaw clenched. Veronica's expression did not change, except for the faint curl of annoyance at the corner of her mouth, as if the video had inconvenienced her more than embarrassed her. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses. "Miss Langford, is there anything you'd like to say regarding this footage?" She exhaled a small laugh, like the question was absurd. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this is being blown completely out of proportion. I was having a very stressful day, and honestly," she gestured at Henry dismissively, "he shouldn't have been standing in the middle of the walkway. I barely touched him." The crowd erupted with angered whispers. Someone muttered, "Unbelievable." Henry's service dog nuzzled his knee gently. He placed a hand on its head, steadying himself. Judge Caprio raised a hand, quieting the room. "Miss Langford," he said slowly, "you believe the community and this court is overreacting." She rolled her eyes. "Yes, Your Honor, I mean," she motioned to the spectators, "look at all this drama. People are acting like I attacked a helpless child. He's a grown man." Her attorney looked like he wanted to crawl under the bench. "Veronica," he whispered frantically, "stop talking." But Veronica continued, voice rising with self-righteous frustration. "It's not my responsibility to adjust my life for every person who has some sort of limitation. I'm sorry he's blind, but that doesn't make him the center of the world." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Henry's lips tightened. His hands trembled not from rage, but from the deep ache of being disrespected by someone who didn't even understand the weight of his daily battles. Judge Caprio closed the folder in front of him. Then he stood. The quiet that followed felt heavy and electric. "Miss Langford," he said, voice quieter, which somehow made it far more powerful, "in my years on this bench, I have seen arrogance, I have seen carelessness, and I have seen a lack of compassion. But what you have displayed here today," he paused, letting the silence bite, "ranks among the most troubling." Veronica's confident smile wavered, slightly. Judge Caprio continued, his gaze steady and unblinking. "That man you dismissed, Mr. Dalton, served this community for 30 years as a firefighter. He lost his sight rescuing 2 children during a house fire." He leaned forward. "And you, Miss Langford, could not offer him even the smallest measure of decency." The audience remained frozen, hanging on every syllable. Veronica's cheeks flushed, but not with shame, with indignation. "So what now?" she snapped. "You're going to throw me in jail because people got emotional over a video?" Her attorney groaned softly into his hands. Judge Caprio exhaled. "No, Miss Langford, jail is not my intention, not today," she smirked triumphantly. "But," he continued, "we are far from finished." The smirk vanished. He gestured to the bailiff. "Bring in the statements." A stack of letters was placed before him, from witnesses, community center staff, neighbors who recognized Veronica, even strangers who had seen the video online. Veronica swallowed. For the first time that morning, uncertainty flickered across her features. Judge Caprio tapped the top of the stack gently. "Before we continue, Miss Langford, I want you to listen. Truly listen. Because the next phase of this hearing depends entirely on whether you are capable of understanding the consequences of your actions." The courtroom held its breath. Judge Caprio looked down at the first letter and began to read. Judge Caprio cleared his throat softly, lifting the first letter from the stack. The paper trembled just slightly in his grip, not from nerves, but from the weight of the words it carried. "This letter," he began, "is from a teacher at the community center who witnessed the incident." Veronica shifted her weight, crossing her arms. Her attorney pressed his lips together so tightly they nearly disappeared. Judge Caprio read aloud. Your Honor, I have worked with visually impaired members of this community for 17 years. I have seen their courage, their frustrations, and their triumphs. I have never, not once, seen a person of means treat one of them with the coldness Miss Langford displayed that day. Her actions were not a mistake. They were a message. The courtroom murmured. Veronica rolled her eyes. Judge Caprio placed the letter aside and picked up another. This one, he said, is from a young man who was nearby when the video was taken. He continued reading. I heard her yelling before I even saw what was happening. When I got close, she was berating him like he'd done something unforgivable. She didn't care that he couldn't see her. She didn't care that her words were cutting. It was the kind of cruelty you don't forget. A woman in the back whispered, shameful. Veronica's jaw tightened. Judge Caprio lowered the letter. Miss Langford, he said gently, do you wish to respond to any of this? She scoffed. Your Honor, these are just emotional people writing emotional things. I barely touched the man. Everyone is acting like I committed a felony. Her voice dripped irritation, not remorse. Judge Caprio inhaled deeply. This court is not punishing you for the reaction, he said. It is assessing your responsibility. He reached for another letter, but before he could read it, Henry Dalton raised his hand slightly, unsure if the gesture was even visible to the judge. His fingers trembled. Your Honor, Henry said quietly, may I speak? The courtroom fell completely silent. Judge Caprio nodded. Mr. Dalton, of course, please take your time. Henry's voice was soft but steady. When I heard the yelling, he said, I didn't know it was directed at me. I thought she was talking to someone else. When she grabbed my cane, I didn't see it coming. I just felt the world disappear. He swallowed hard, gathering himself. People think a cane is just a stick, but it's not. It's my sight, my freedom, my way to exist in a world that no longer looks back at me. Veronica shifted, uncomfortable not because she understood him but because eyes were on her. Henry continued, his voice dipping into something raw and vulnerable. When she threw it, it felt like she was throwing me away, like I wasn't worth the space I was standing in. A lump formed in several throats across the courtroom. Even the reporters glanced down momentarily, as if absorbing the weight of his pain required a moment of respect. Henry's service dog pressed closer to his knee. He touched the dog's head gently, drawing strength. I don't want revenge, he said. I don't want her punished harshly. I just want her to understand that the people she looks down on are fighting battles she can't see. Judge Caprio placed a hand over his heart. Thank you, Mr. Dalton, he said softly. Your humility honors this courtroom. Henry bowed his head slightly. Veronica stared straight ahead, expression hard as marble. Judge Caprio returned to the bench. Miss Langford, he said, this case is not about a moment of frustration. It is about your conduct before, during, and after the incident. And it is about whether this court believes you are capable of growth. Veronica exhaled sharply. So what exactly do you want from me? An apology? Her tone was a challenge, not an offer. Henry shook his head gently. I don't need an apology, he said softly, if it's not real. Veronica looked away. Judge Caprio folded his hands. Miss Langford, I want you to listen to one more statement. This is from Mr. Dalton's daughter. He opened the letter. Dear Judge Caprio, my father is the strongest man I know. He lost his sight saving 2 children from a burning home. He has never complained, never asked, why me? He taught me that compassion is not optional. When Miss Langford humiliated him, she didn't just hurt my father. She reminded him of the one fear he never speaks about, the fear of becoming invisible. A hush fell. Veronica's lips parted slightly. Judge Caprio set the letter aside. Miss Langford, he said, do you have anything at all you wish to say now? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Something in the letter, or in Henry's trembling voice earlier, had struck somewhere inside her, though she hid it behind a brittle shield. When she finally spoke, her voice was controlled but shaky. She hesitated. Her attorney leaned forward, whispering urgently, Veronica, this is where you show remorse. She shook her head once, barely perceptible, then lifted her chin. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she said quietly, "but I also don't think I should be painted as a monster. I was overwhelmed, I reacted poorly, but I'm not the villain everyone wants me to be." Half the room stiffened. Judge Caprio studied her, not her clothes, her wealth, her posture, but her eyes. He saw fear there, maybe guilt, maybe the first crack in the armor, but also pride, a lot of pride. "Miss Langford," he said finally, "this court does not exist to destroy you. It exists to teach, to correct, and to protect." He stood slowly. "And so we will proceed to sentencing." Veronica inhaled sharply. A ripple of anticipation spread through the crowd. Judge Caprio picked up a sheet of paper, not to read from it, but to center his thoughts. "Given the severity of the behavior, the absence of physical injury, and your conduct today, here is the sentence." The courtroom froze. Veronica closed her eyes for a single, trembling moment. Judge Caprio began. "First," he said, "you will write a formal handwritten apology to Mr. Dalton." Veronica rolled her eyes slightly but did not speak. "Second," Judge Caprio continued, "you will complete 240 hours of community service, not generic service, but service specifically working with visually impaired individuals." A collective murmur. Veronica's head jerked up. "You want me to spend time with—" Judge Caprio raised a hand. "Yes, with people whom you dismissed and disrespected. You will learn who they are beyond your assumptions." Veronica swallowed hard. "Third," he said, "you will attend an empathy and disability awareness program offered through the Providence Accessibility Center." Her jaw clenched. "And fourth," Judge Caprio added, voice firm but gentle, "you will cover the cost of repairing Mr. Dalton's cane and fund the installation of 2 new accessibility ramps at the community center." Gasps. Whispers, a few nods of approval. "And finally," he said, "you will return to this courtroom in 180 days for a full review of your progress." He leaned forward. "If you fail to complete any portion of this sentence, I will convert the remainder to jail time." Veronica paled. Her attorney rubbed his forehead. Judge Caprio's voice softened. "This sentence is not meant to break you, Miss Langford. It is meant to open your eyes." Veronica stared at him, stunned, like she didn't know whether to cry, argue, or walk out. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. "Before I finalize the ruling," he said, "I want to ask one last question." He looked directly at Veronica. "Miss Langford, do you understand why this punishment is being given to you?" She didn't answer. Not immediately. Not for several long, stretched seconds. Her breathing hitched. Finally, she whispered, "I think I'm starting to." Judge Caprio nodded slowly. "Then I hope," he said, "that understanding continues." He lifted the gavel. "Sentencing will be formally entered. Court will resume after recess." Bang! The gavel struck. The room exhaled. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because the moment Veronica stepped out of the courtroom doors, everything changed. The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse closed behind Veronica Langford with a dull echo. She paused on the steps, clutching the railing as the brisk wind swept over her. A colder gust than she expected, as if the entire city had shifted in the hours since she entered. Her attorney spoke gently. "We'll appeal portions if necessary." Veronica shook her head. "No. It won't help." For the first time that day, her voice wasn't defensive. It was hollow. Across the street, a few reporters raised their cameras but didn't advance. The officer standing nearby kept them at bay. A police cruiser idled at the curb. And then she saw him. Henry Dalton, escorted by his daughter Mia. His service dog, Archer, walked obediently beside him. Henry couldn't see her, but Mia did, a flash of hesitation crossing her face when their eyes met. Veronica's throat tightened. She hadn't expected to face them again so soon. "Dad," Mia whispered, "she's right in front of us." Henry nodded faintly. "I can feel it." Veronica wanted to turn away, but something in Henry's stillness anchored her. She took a step closer. "Mr. Dalton," she said, voice trembling. I know you said you don't need an apology unless it's real. I don't know if anything I say will ever feel real to you, but I'm sorry. Not because the court wants me to be, but because I should have been a better person that day." Henry didn't speak right away. Archer nudged Henry's hand gently, sensing the shift in the air. Finally, Henry said quietly, "I appreciate those words, and I hope for your sake they're honest." Veronica swallowed, unable to respond. She wasn't used to people hearing the truth behind her words. She wasn't used to speaking it either. Mia offered a restrained nod, neither forgiving nor rejecting, simply acknowledging. "Come on, Dad," she said softly. The Daltons walked past her and continued down the sidewalk. And Veronica stood there for a long moment, staring at the space they'd occupied, feeling something she had spent years refusing to let in. Shame. And something achingly close to humility. 6 weeks later, the Providence Accessibility Center was not what Veronica expected. She assumed it would be sterile, dim, depressing. Instead, it was bright, lively, filled with the sounds of cane taps, laughter, and the constant hum of determination. Her assigned supervisor, Clara Jensen, was a woman in her early 60s with a warm voice and a spine made of steel. "Today," Clara said, handing Veronica a folded blindfold, "you're going to learn how to navigate the hallway using only sound and a cane." Veronica blinked. "Me? I'm not. This is for the people who come here, not me." "No." Clara placed the blindfold firmly in Veronica's hand. "This is for you. Empathy isn't thinking about how someone feels. It's realizing you have no idea until you try." Veronica hesitated. Then slowly she tied the blindfold around her head. Darkness swallowed her. Clara placed a cane in her hand. "Now walk. I'm right beside you." The hallway suddenly felt enormous, every step a threat. Her breathing quickened. Clara's voice guided her. "Listen, feel the air. Let the sound tell you what your eyes can't." Tap, tap, tap. Her cane hit a wall she didn't expect, sending a jolt through her. She flinched. "Good," Clara said. "Now you know how much trust it takes for the people who live like this every day." Veronica swallowed tears she didn't expect. For the first time, she understood. 10 weeks later, Veronica sat in the community center's recreation room, helping a young boy named Javier thread beads onto a cord. His vision was nearly gone, but his imagination was vivid. "What should I make?" he asked. "Anything you want," Veronica replied. "A lion," Javier said confidently. Veronica smiled for the first time that day genuinely. "Then a lion it is." Javier hesitated. "Miss Veronica, are you still sad?" She froze a moment. Children always saw more than adults expected. "Maybe," she admitted quietly. Javier nodded like a wise old soul trapped in a small frame. "My mom says when you're sad, it's because you're learning." Veronica stared at him, and something inside her cracked, softly, quietly, painfully, and began to open. 180 days later, the courthouse looked different this time. Not because anything had changed, just because she had. Veronica walked in without designer sunglasses, without the armor of confidence she'd once worn like a badge. She dressed plainly. She carried a folder of documented hours, photographs, letters, progress records. Inside, Henry Dalton sat in the first row with Mia and Archer. He had agreed to attend the review hearing. Veronica approached and spoke gently. "Mr. Dalton, if it's all right with you, I'd like to sit near you until they call my name." Henry turned his head toward her voice. "Of course." Mia gave a small, sincere smile. Veronica sat down, quiet, reflective. When her name was called, she stepped forward. Judge Caprio studied her with a soft but discerning gaze. "Miss Langford," he said, "how have the last 6 months been for you?" Veronica released a steady breath. "Hard," she said honestly. "And needed. I didn't know how much I didn't know." Judge Caprio nodded. "That is the root of all growth." She continued, voice steady but weighted. "I learned how people move through the world without sight. I learned what fear sounds like and what courage feels like. I learned that serving others changes you more than it helps them. And I learned who I was, and who I don't want to be again." Henry's daughter wiped a quiet tear. Judge Caprio folded his hands thoughtfully. "And your apology? Do you feel differently about it now?" Veronica turned toward Henry. "Yes," she said softly, "because now I know enough to mean it." Henry nodded, accepting the words not blindly but thoughtfully. Judge Caprio smiled gently. "Miss Langford," he said, "you have completed every requirement of your sentence, not minimally, not reluctantly, but sincerely." A hush fell across the room. He stood. "And so I am closing your case today. Not because you checked every box, but because you opened your heart. That is harder than any legal requirement." Veronica pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. Judge Caprio leaned forward. "But I will ask one final question. The most important one." She lifted her eyes. "Miss Langford," he said softly, "what will you do with the person you've become?" The courtroom was silent. Veronica inhaled deeply. "I'll keep learning," she whispered. "And I'll keep serving. Not because a judge told me to, because it made me someone I finally respect." Judge Caprio smiled. "Then I believe this case has served its purpose." He lifted the gavel. "Case closed." Bang. Outside the courthouse final scene, Henry waited at the bottom of the steps, Archer sitting patiently at his side. Veronica approached slowly. "Mr. Dalton," she said gently, "I don't expect anything from you. Not forgiveness, not friendship, nothing, but I want you to know something." Henry tilted his head. "You helped me become someone better," she said. "Not by what happened that day, but by how you faced it with grace I didn't deserve." Henry smiled faintly. "Growth isn't about deserving," he replied. "It's about choosing." Veronica blinked away tears. "Thank you," she whispered. He extended his hand. She shook it carefully, respectfully, gratefully. And the story, born from a moment of humiliation and anger, ended with something unexpected. Not punishment, not bitterness, but a quiet human connection.